This man to my left, Dr. Paul Benson, the provost here at UD. And we'll be kicking it off with Ms. Marcie Smith from the Responsible Endowments Coalition. So take it away, Marcie.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to Dr. Benson for the invitation. It's really great to be here. So a little bit about the Responsible Endowments Coalition. We are an 11-year-old organization founded by students who realized that they could make positive social, environmental, and economic change through their university's endowments. For the past 11 years, we've been supporting students and now increasingly alumni as they run campaigns, engage with their administrators and trustees in order to get socially responsible investment policies implemented, in order to encourage local investing, and then also more recently to support fossil fuel divestment campaigns and private prison divestment campaigns. So the title of this panel is Success on Campus, How to Prompt Change at the University Level. And most of my remarks will focus on divestment, but since the description was broad, I'm going to draw from some of Rec's other work as well, because I do think that the fossil fuel divestment movement has raised broader, more existential questions about the role of the university, its relationship with its students, the function of the endowment. So I'll also address some of those things as well. And the first thing that I wanted to clarify is the use of the word change. So, what kinds of change are we talking about? And I suspect that within this crowd, we probably have a similar read on what positive social and economic change and environmental change means. But a lot of economic change over the past 30 years has not been positive. It's created a lot of dislocation. There's been enormous change over the past, particularly 30 years since the dawn of neoliberal economic policies in the late 1980s, or particularly the mid-1980s. So I think that framing my remarks in the context of this history that we're still in, that privatization, financialization, globalization for many has prompted changes that have undermined their ability to survive for students, have undermined their ability to pursue careers that are meaningful, and in some cases to even live independently, particularly in recent years. So the kinds of change that we're talking about are changes that, of course, make the economy more sustainable and more just. And the fossil fuel divestment movement is, I think, unique in that it has identified, one linchpin industry, the fossil fuel industry, that really informs the structure of the entire economy. And that's really unusual, and it's essential in this particular moment, because as we're talking about change that makes the economy more sustainable and more just, it's really important to identify, what are the cornerstones of the economy that has produced the negative changes over the past 30 years. One thing that I'll mention, it may have already come up, but there's a large action at the Divestment Student Network, which is an organization you may have heard from earlier this conference, but it's a network of students that emerged out of the fossil fuel divestment movement, an independent student network. And they are starting to build relationships with the private prison divestment movement, making connections between the fossil fuel industry, the extractive economy, and the role of incarceration in both controlling labor markets, in some instances controlling dissent, controlling migration as climate change accelerates. And this is really heartening because their interpretation of then the kinds of changes that our economy needs to see it's a picture that's big enough to include racial justice and economic justice in addition to environmental justice and arresting climate change. So how to prompt these kinds of changes at the university level? I really believe that that change has to come both from the grassroots, but also leadership, particularly within institutions like universities, has to be aligned with the types of changes that I just described. And I think that it's worth noting, what is in fact the mission of the university, because leadership must put mission first within the university context. And one of the things that the Responsible Endowments Coalition has seen since our inception is the university endowment increasingly sort of being inserted for the university mission. So infinite growth of the university endowment has become the raison d'etre in many cases, or at least that's the appearance frequently through university policies. So I feel very strongly about this question. What is the mission of the university? So Martha Nussbaum, who's a philosopher and comments on this question of the role of the liberal arts and the role of education, describes the role of higher education and specifically the liberal arts in cultivating humanity. And the phrase that I like to use is reproducing the conditions for democracy. The university has an absolutely essential role in ensuring that students not only are equipped with the tools and analytical skills that they need to engage in the economy, but also to engage in democracy. And so one of the risks I see of this trajectory of endowments becoming the growth of the endowments, that is, becoming the central goal of a university, which is admittedly encouraged by university rankings, that the system that prioritizes large and fast-growing endowments as being higher ranked. That's an issue that REC has been working on. Of course, that then undermines the ability of the institution to focus on its core mission, which is, again, reproducing the conditions necessary for democracy. And part of the reason I feel so strongly about this is because of my own experience with higher education. I'm from a part of the country where adult illiteracy is around 45% in eastern Kentucky. Actually, that's the statewide number. And that is reflected in levels of spending for public universities, but it's also reflected, rather the causes, the underlying causes of such a number, I believe are reflected in some of the attitudes that some of our institutions of higher learning have taken towards economic policy, for example. If we don't invest in education that puts the development of capable, thoughtful citizens first, then what we see in our democracy mirrors what we see in ecology. It's an erosion of the social fabric necessary to ensure civilization. So the only way that I would have been able, that I was able to attend university was with a scholarship. And that scholarship came from an endowment. And so, the Responsible Endowments Coalition has started commenting also on not only the investment of the endowment, what does it mean for an endowment to be responsibly invested, but how is an endowment responsibly used? So I would encourage everyone, as we're thinking about the meaning of endowments in the age of a fossil fuel divestment movement, it's raising really important questions about mission alignment and endowment investment. And I think that we need to expand that conversation, particularly in a moment in which student debt has eclipsed all other forms of consumer debt. We need to think about I think what in some instances can credibly be described as university wealth hoarding. And that is important because students are not only facing a climate crisis, they're also facing the crisis of an unrelenting debt paradigm in the economy broadly. And I think that in order for universities to serve their students, they have to see the connections between climate change, student debt, and then also increasingly incarceration, because the issues again that fossil fuel divestment students are bringing are increasingly intersectional, which brings me to another point. How then is leadership to affect its mission of cultivating humanity, reproducing the conditions necessary for democracy? We've seen throughout the fossil fuel divestment movement that productive decisions happen when students are included. And so, I was just at a presentation at a public university 2 weeks ago, and the CIO was present for the first 15 minutes of this panel discussion. And the discussion actually wasn't even on fossil fuel divestment. It was on responsible investment generally, but then left. And it was interesting because during the Q&A, there were 2 students who raised that point. The students were watching leadership to see whether they really took this issue seriously. And so, coming back to this point about the importance of leadership reflecting that mission, change does come from the bottom, but leadership has enormous opportunities. And I think Elizabeth Warren, in her comments a few weeks ago regarding implementation of Dodd-Frank within the Fed, was making this point about how sometimes grassroots leadership can be used by institutional leadership as a way to dodge responsibility. And so I think we've also seen that in some instances within the fossil fuel divestment movement, in which universities have put the onus on students, to figure out all of the technical questions of well, how would this work? Answering very technical questions that they know that students between exams and probably frequently part-time jobs are going to be able to answer less effectively than people whose careers have been built trying to answer this question, these types of questions. So the importance of university leadership on these questions looks like including students. It also looks like taking leadership on questions of curriculum. So this is something that fossil fuel divestment students are also starting to organize around. We need economics curricula that is up to the task of solving 21st century problems, not economics curricula that is part of a Cold War mentality in which certain questions aren't allowed to be asked because we're pitted in a global war. We have to approach the questions of this century in the tradition of the liberal arts, in a tradition of free and honest inquiry. And so I think in addition to the importance of including students, university leadership has to be taking a long view on questions of curriculum. And then coming to the question of the endowment, this is another area in which we desperately need university leadership and the central focus of the Responsible Endowments Coalition's work. So part of the reason I took the opportunity to join the Responsible Endowments Coalition and why I've been so inspired by the work of the fossil fuel divestment movement is that it's raising questions about the meaning of money. You know, what is the purpose of this pool of capital that the university has collected and stewarded? You know, what is its meaning? Is it, as I said earlier, is it to become the raison d'etre of sort of an ersatz private firm? Or is it another tool in the pursuit of the university mission? Because if, for example, you have a university that is investing in fossil fuels, you're communicating something to your student. Education in the university context doesn't end at the classroom door. The whole experience of being a university student is an educational one. I remember, the importance as a young person who, again, wouldn't have been able to attend my college without a scholarship, and I remember the experience being so valuable in part because of the mentorship that I got and the integrity of that of those mentors. And I'm sure that anyone who works with students will back me up here that part of the power of youth, and I think particularly today's students, is their demands for integrity and moral consistency. I think that's kind of at the heart of the fossil fuel divestment movement, is that we have to align what we do with what we say. We have to align our money with our mission. If you have a wealthy university in the middle of a community that is deeply impoverished, and that university has a large endowment that could be deployed to spur economic development, and that's not happening, again, that's saying something to students, that's educating them about something, that's saying these social relations are okay. It's okay for this to exist, for this institution with its wealth to exist amidst poverty. When a university is invested in private prisons, that says something to students. And I, for one, have been extremely grateful for, again, the sort of uncompromising position of students on these questions of really morality. And I think that that's something that can't be forgotten, in conversations about stranded assets, which is a compelling, it's a compelling argument. It's a great reason to divest from fossil fuels. But there is also a moral dimension, and students have insisted on that piece of the story not being forgotten either, and also being connected to issues beyond climate change. And my final idea, I suppose, for how leadership in particular can prompt change at the university level, and this is something that REC has been discussing with partners for some time. What would this look like? Is engagement with policymakers on questions of endowment management. I understand that universities exist in a competitive marketplace, and so part of your challenge is preserving your institution, which is a perfectly perfectly reasonable, certainly, but important mission, dimension of your mission. You have to ensure the reproduction of your own institution. But the significance of existing in a competitive marketplace is that, if you have, sort of the lowest common denominator can sometimes pull everybody down. Particularly, we've seen this particularly with endowment management. So if a university pursues a very reckless but very profitable investment strategy, they are rewarded in the ranking system. And the only way that that can be reformed is by law. And it may seem counterintuitive, but I do think that the answer to this lies in coalitions of university leadership engaging with policymakers to make it easier to align university missions with university investments. And, as we've seen with philanthropy, guidance for the IRS has made it much easier for them to engage in mission-aligned investing. It's made decisions around divestment much more clear-cut legally. And so I think that there's significant opportunity for university trustees and administrators to come together to affect changes at the level of the market as well, which would, again, better position universities for the core mission of reproducing the conditions for democracy. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcie. I was thinking as you were talking about extensive about leadership, and over the last day or so, we've talked a lot about leadership at UD and Father Solma and Dr. Curran and George Hanley and our divestment from fossil fuels in the last couple of years. But Dr. Benson also has been a tremendous leader in this regard as well. And I'm the chief financial officer here at UD. And over the last several months, he and I have worked together on creating a green revolving fund, and we're getting that off the ground here too. And so from a leadership perspective and taking this a step further on campus at UD, maybe I heard there was some remarks about the lights in this room, and maybe we can work on that. And the next time we have this conference, it'll be a little bit different lighting in here, and certainly more cheap in the long run. But maybe Dr. Benson can speak a little bit more about some of the other leadership opportunities we have here on campus.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. I thought that what I might do, especially after really rich conversation yesterday around a number of these issues, is try to identify 5 considerations that maybe from the standpoint of students and faculty are not always as clear as they might be regarding how university decisions get made. Although I do think some of the discussions yesterday touched on various facets of some of these points. So 5 strategic considerations related to broadly, I think, decisions about university endowments, but specifically about divest-invest movements. 1 has to do with context, 1 has to do with commitment, a 3rd has to do with time, a 4th has to do with structure, and the 5th has to do with education, which is our central reason for existing as a university. So context. I think one thing that often mystifies people outside of academia is that they assume that most universities operate in the same way, have similar cultures, have similar procedures, similar structures. And having been, actually I've never been out of education. It's kind of maybe sad from some points of view, but it's my ideal life. Ever since kindergarten, I've never had a year away from school. Yeah, sad. And that has something to do with my vocation as a philosopher. There's not a lot of elbow room for that in the for-profit economy. So universities really are very heterogeneous institutions in many ways. Our missions are more heterogeneous than people imagine. Our cultures are very heterogeneous. You could take two of the universities sponsored by the Society of Mary and find that the way in which faculty and staff and students interact, while there's a core similarity, is still pretty dramatically different. And then our administrative structures are very, very different. I happen to be in the provost's office right now. Who reports to a provost is highly variable across universities. So my key point about context is this, that heterogeneous university missions, cultures, administrative structures will resist homogeneous generic strategies. You need culturally, locally specific ways of getting student voice in particular to the table in decisions about endowment. And so as you think about how students, faculty, staff, alumni, other constituents of the university might influence decisions about an endowment, you really have to think about distinctive features of the university's mission and culture that can be assets in that regard. Also, looking at other moments in the history of a university where significant change has occurred, trying to determine who were the agents of that change, what were the offices that really made key differences. I mean, this is fairly obvious in any kind of change-related effort, but I do think we often forget this and simply assume that there's a generic way to get to the table. But in fact, in universities, those change agents can come from almost any corner of the university community. In some universities, particular alumni organizations have, in fact, almost more power than anybody else. In other universities, students have the easiest pathway to the president's office. And so those considerations of local context have to be attended to carefully. Secondly, commitment. Most universities, worth their salt, have made some significant prior commitments to socially responsible investment strategies. Very few universities will invest in literally anything. And secondly, over 600 universities, presidents have signed the president's climate commitment. Now you may say, well, how much leverage does that get you? Look how few universities have divested, notwithstanding that fact. But there is, I think, some powerful strategic leverage here. Most of the arguments presented against fossil fuel divestment would in fact be arguments against any socially responsible investment strategy. They would be arguments that universities should be investing in big tobacco, in weapons-related development, and so forth. Seriously. And making that point clear is a powerful shaming strategy, because universities will not back off of the core commitments they've made, even if in a pretty minimal way, to socially responsible investment strategies. So the challenge is to develop the argument around mission integrity and look specifically at what were the characteristics of those industries that led universities to adopt socially responsible investment strategies and show that those characteristics map directly onto the fossil fuel industry. The other challenge, and this was noted at a few points yesterday, is that while over 600 universities, presidents have signed the climate commitment, very few universities have actually developed detailed plans about how they will reach their climate mitigation goals. And frankly, universities are entering a period of our history where we're beginning to work very hard on those plans. And so integrating efforts around divestment in that kind of planning is a very useful strategy to take. I'll allude to this in somewhat more detail in a moment, but Pitzer College, which small liberal arts college, one of the Claremont schools, which was the first school with a really sizable endowment per student to divest in April 2014, they integrated their divestment commitment within a broader conversation about sustainability planning on their campus. And I think there are a lot of important lessons to learn from that particular case. A third factor is time, our most precious asset. I think that one of the challenges that so many campuses have encountered around fossil fuel divestment and other endowment-related campaigns is that the ways in which student organizations structure and think about their time, the ways in which boards of trustees and administrators structure and think about their time are simply not synchronized with one another, right? They operate really in very different planes. In looking at all the arguments that have been presented against divestment, it seems fairly evident to me that most of those arguments are rooted in defensiveness and fear. On their face, they're just not very good arguments. And so you have to ask, why does that fear exist? The fear exists for a number of reasons, but one predominant reason is lack of understanding of what really the deeper motivations of the issue are. And to address that lack of understanding takes time. It takes education. It takes some level of trust and relationship. While I think there were a number of idiosyncrasies about the way in which the University of Dayton went about our decision, nevertheless, one of the things that I think was done very, very well is that a lot of time was taken within the board to study this issue, to bring in expertise, and to listen to a wide range of perspectives. The reason our board was able to come to a unanimous decision in May 2014 is precisely that that time had been taken. No one felt under the gun to make a decision now before people were ready. And I'll grant that this is a particular challenge, as I indicated, for student organizations because students are only around for a short period of time on a campus, and also for entirely appropriate and understandable reasons, have a sense of urgency and passion that makes it difficult to be patient, to think about building relationships. But like most institutional leaders, members of boards want to feel that they've had enough time to digest all of the considerations that bear on big decisions of this sort, and especially decisions that have financial impact on the institution. I think that one of the particular benefits of this conference is that there is such a wide range of expertise here that many of us would be more than happy to speak with leaders, board members at other universities and institutions and help build some bridges and relationships across institutions. As Marcie indicated, I think student organizers around divestment are really doing an excellent job to involve alumni, to try to link different issues and different types of institutions around questions of investment policy. But more could be done among particular universities, for instance, Catholic universities, in this way. And board members like to talk with other board members. Administrative leaders like to talk with other administrative leaders. It's a natural human phenomenon. And so we need to do more of that in order to open up that time for good decision making. Fourth, structure. It's one of the deepest ironies about universities, who are supposed to be centers of expertise in research-based examination of big human questions, that we often don't carry out that research very well institutionally. We all have offices of institutional research, but we usually don't use them to focus on internal questions such as the uses of our endowments. And so thinking about a divestment campaign and asking, what will the structure be that will bear diverse voices, diverse participation, intelligent, well-researched study of the issue is an important one because few universities have those structures already in place. Usually the issue is delegated to some committee. There's very little time and no process for addressing the question. And as a result, fear and defensiveness take over and then a battle ensues. So again, I'll allude to the Pitzer case. After a pretty concerted student activist campaign, there finally came a decision that there would be a diverse and open structure created really to devote a serious period of time to careful study about the college's sustainability plan, and within that, considerations of the endowment. So I think one challenge for universities is that we need better structures for studying these issues and hence for making wiser decisions about them. And then finally, because I'm an educator, it is critical, and Marcie alluded to this, that we always keep at the center of our vision the fact that the decisions that institutions make, that universities make, about any area of their operations are important educational moments. And I think this is particularly true with investment policy. When we make impact investing policies or engage in impact investing practices, we are modeling for our students ways in which they can live, ways in which the institutions that they will work with or work for can approach their mission. We're modeling in particular what it means to be ethically responsible people and people with higher purpose than simply being economically maximizing actors. This, of course, and this has been discussed a lot since the beginning of the conference on Thursday evening, should be straightforward for Catholic universities to do. The University of Dayton mission is to connect learning and scholarship with leadership and service, and in particular, to offer integrative education to our students, to educate whole persons. This is fairly boilerplate language for any Catholic college or university, and it seems to me that issues around endowment are primary lenses through which we can think about the integration of education, not only across disciplines, but across those domains of learning and scholarship, leadership, and service. So those are a few suggestions about particular points of deserving attention in strategizing around investment decisions at universities.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions for Paul or Marcie?
Thanks, Marcie and Paul. That was a great, thought-provoking session. I've learned so much here in the last couple of days as I go back to BU to fight the fight. And it's just listening to you, Paul, talk highlights your point of diversity across universities because, the administration here is quite different than the administration at Boston University without making any value judgment, but it's a fundamentally different beast altogether. But Marcie, you raised...
This is why Andy came to us.
My most recent stop was at Boston University.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to corner you after the session.
Okay, all right, let's talk.
But Marcie, I wanted to pick up on a point that you made, in which Paul alluded to at the end of yours about education and the role that faculty have in all this. And faculty, now obviously I'm biased because I'm a faculty member, but faculty really are the glue of the core of the university, because that's how we attract students ultimately and attract research funding and so on. And students are ephemeral, right? So students come and go. And your point about boards operating on a different time step, has really come home to roost at BU, because we had a group of students who stoked the furnace of divestment, got the 350.org people involved and got the petitions going and got the board to appoint this committee, and it's now 18 months later, and those two people have graduated. So we have a new group of students. So the continuity there is really, it's up to the faculty, right? So the faculty are the ones that have to keep that momentum going on the student front. But I wanted to speak specifically about curriculum, Marcie, what you mentioned. And you mentioned about the role of administrators in this, but ultimately curriculum, we don't want to leave curriculum up to the administrators. Sorry, Paul, but this is really up to faculty. Right? Faculty drive curriculum development. And so I'm wondering what you would have to say, and the other faculty in the audience, about the role that education and curriculum and degree programs have in pushing forward the type of change that we've been talking about here, and the challenge of getting faculty interested and involved, and moving really into a sort of how we balance activism with, reasoned scientific inquiry in the natural and social sciences in the classroom, and how it's a tough challenge.
So I definitely agree. So thank you for that corrective. I think that the role of administration in, if there is a role for the administration to play in curriculum, those decisions have to do with, resourcing, what gets priority, and then also, ensuring preserving academic freedom. And so I think that there is a role, but it's a more general kind of tone-setting role. And I guess as to the relationship between students and faculty, the dynamic that I've seen that I think is most productive is when students help set the questions, So students can help identify, what are the questions of this age? I just came from the SRI conference in Boulder, Colorado, the sort of industry conference for socially responsible investing, and somebody made the comment that, it's as though, our economy, many features of it were designed, to resolve different problems. We have new problems now. And sometimes the dynamic that I see both between students and faculty, and then also students and administrators, is that students have different questions. They sort of are looking the world, they're scanning the world, they're anticipating the crises that they're going to inherit and have to deal with, and those are the questions that they are seeking guidance on from faculty and administrators. But of course, the corollary role of faculty being free to then support students in that process of inquiry, and then also to have space for independent inquiry as well. All of that, to me, that is the healthy academic ecosystem.
Hi. So Marcie, first of all, I really want to commend you for incredibly, I think, thoughtful comments about the perpetuation of endowment growth, the prioritization over endowment growth as opposed to endowment purpose. But I wonder if you would comment on another issue, and that is the growing corrosive influence of corporations on the university and the university's mission.
Yes. So I went to the University of North Carolina School of Law, and it has been really upsetting to see what is in effect corporate raiding that has happened since the Tea Party takeover in North Carolina, specifically to the university system. So I mentioned that universities help reproduce the conditions for democracy. Those institutions are a public asset. And I see, to give people some context, in 2013, North Carolina, which stands out in the southeastern U.S. as sort of an unusually progressive place, which is probably connected to its better economic indicators compared to many states in the southeast. And at the core of that is the university system. And many people have observed this, and people on the left and right, Republican, Democrat, have all defended the University of North Carolina system as being a public asset, a common asset. There's a real public spirit in North Carolina which believes that we have market economies that generate surplus, and the state helps redistribute that surplus to support things like public education that is accessible for everybody in the state on the basis of merit. And that is one of the first things that the now right-wing Board of Governors has attacked, is both academic freedom and solvency of the University of North Carolina system, which is really the crown jewel of North Carolina's public infrastructure. And I see these kinds of attacks, which we also see in Wisconsin. We see them in many states. I see it as part of a project, you know, to raid the commons, if you will, raid the intellectual commons. You know, ideas are incredibly important. I was actually before this sort of phase of my political journey, I was you know, on the hard right, and we took ideas very seriously. There was a project. There was an ideological project, and it was organized, and it both sought to advance our own ideas through think tanks, through taking over universities, particularly economics curriculum, and then attacking opponents where it hurt, which was their ideas. So I see, Ellen, I mean, I see the corporate takeover of universities, not only serving financial interests, which it does. You know, when you get people with economic interests on a university board, frequently they make sure that you know, their firms or firms that they have interest in end up getting to manage money. And you know, Thomas Piketty in Capital makes the point that university endowments and Congress people are the two groups that make the highest returns on their investments. So I think in addition to those narrower sort of individual interests, there's also a larger project at play that is seeking to strip the asset of the public intellectual commons.
I'd like to follow up on that. Thank you so much, Marcie, for bringing the word financialization into play here. And it's something that's been throughout the conference. So we've done a great job on raising the question of how we align our investment strategies with our mission. And that's one of the fundamental threats of financialization, of what's becoming sort of a sovereign wealth model of endowment for universities, is it creates this political free zone, right, where values can't go and returns the only thing that matters. It's a fundamental threat to our missions, and this conference is addressing that threat head on. There's a deeper threat, a more subtle threat that I think your response to Ellen's question just really highlighted, right? This corporate takeover problem. In North Carolina and in Wisconsin, though, it was political, right? It was politics. It was real old-fashioned politics. They won in the ballot box, and they got to do things. The more subtle threat and the more pernicious threat for this financialization is that it doesn't appear as political and it doesn't appear as ideological. It's a transformation of university missions from one that's primarily organizationally and community-based, right? Who we are here, who our faculty is here, who the staff are, how we're all working together as a community, to one with, we have an endowment. I mean, and this is the trick of aligning endowments with mission, is it's still a financial model, right? It's still a financial capital-based model. You know, what can you do with capital? That's the depoliticized politics of neoliberalism, right? And that's a lesson we're teaching our students, even by aligning our endowments with our mission, is how do you get things done? Well, you get capital, and then you do research, and then you make decisions and you implement that mission, right? That's the neoliberal model of politics. It works behind the scenes. It's not a frontal assault like the Tea Party is. And I don't have an answer for that, but it worries me deeply. There are other more communal institutional models of agency that we used to have in universities that is being replaced by this more financial one. So I just wanted to raise that anxiety. So thank you.
Don, one more here. Bob, take one more question.
Maybe this goes to Andy and to Paul a little bit. The way sustainability challenged the faculty and students to integrate things across the curriculum, across all departments, we also started in sustainability programs to integrate across from the academic side to the facilities side. Now what we're hearing here is we need yet another step of integration as being fundamental to all the sustainability questions of thinking about the financial side of the university and how the university operates, not just in its facilities, but in its finances. Do you have any suggestions for how we start to cross that barrier and how we can constructively do something in that direction?
I'm just the moderator. I think it is. I mean, I've learned a lot over the last day and a half in terms of that the linkages are they're far deeper than you ever really want to, than perhaps at the surface you really think about in terms of linking the endowment with the mission, with the finance, with the finances of the university. And I think, at least in my brief time here, that we're taking steps in that regard and how we're managing the university from a financial perspective, at least at UD. For those of you that don't know, some of the things that we're doing are, we're trying to, as I alluded to when I was introducing Paul, creating a green revolving fund, and we're just, we're gonna, and we're actually behind a lot of institutions in that regard, but from a sustainability standpoint, makes a heck of a lot of sense. But then when you look at the actual economics of a GRF, you can give me a return on investment of what a GRF, what everybody else seems to be doing there, makes a lot of sense economically and financially. And then other things that we're doing, at least here at UD, are really trying to look at, and again, I think we're a little bit behind the 8 ball in this as well, but looking at how we're buying things, how we're actually buying goods and services, and so really trying to save money and be as sustainable as possible there. And then I think UD also does a great job with labor practices in that we don't do a heck of a lot of outsourcing. We have our own dining services folks, and they do a great job. And really, we actually employ some underserved populations within our dining services. So I think it really cross-cuts a lot of those different areas, at least at UD. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Paul.
The only comment I make is a general one, and that is that it's really important that different areas of responsibility in the university are closely connected and in conversation with one another. Because I'd been on the faculty so long, once I moved to the dean's office, and then especially to St. Mary's and the provost's office, people would ask me, well, how do decisions really get made? And I would say, well, what happens is some people come into a room with a lot of data, and they sit around the table, and they talk it through, pretty much like human beings do in any other context. The challenge, of course, is who's at that table, who's been able to influence the information that's come in, and how thoughtful and reflective are those decisions, and what are the opportunities for people to critique those decisions once they've been made, or to weigh in an intermediate step. And I do think we're fortunate in that at UD, the offices that fall under Andy's areas of responsibility, which are not necessarily offices that feel great comfort in talking to academics, here are, I think with Andy's leadership, are much more open to having that conversation. But there's no question, in larger institutions, it does take commitment for that to happen. And that's, I think your question is a really important reminder of how central that commitment should be.
I think we'll have to end there. I think we're already a little bit behind this morning, but thank you all for your questions. Thanks to Marcie and Paul for your comments and for questions.
Thanks very much to our fantastic panel. We're going to reset very quickly so that we can have our conversation, which is our next event. So feel free to get a quick coffee, but we're going to start again hopefully in about 5 minutes. Thanks.